Okay. Good afternoon. So we're on 3:30. You're in the best place to be to grab the drinks at 4 o'clock. All right. So we will make sure we won't be overrunning, but yeah, this is where you need to be. So first question for you is really, how long have you been in the learning tech industry? So anybody here, it's been under 3 years that you've been involved with learning technology? Right, there's quite a few of you. Okay, so I'm calling you guys the COVID babies, all right? So you probably ended up getting involved in this because of COVID. All right, so what we're going to go through is a little bit about learning systems. So I'm Fiona Leteney. I work for the industry analysts that focuses on Europe, and it's HR and learning technology that we focus on. And I've been in the industry over 20 years. I've either sold, managed, or implemented learning systems during that time, and so I take the lead on learning systems for our analyst firm. So what we're going to do today is, first of all, I'm going to go through a little bit of our digital learning reality survey that will just help us focus on what learning systems are about. I'm then going to we're going to introduce the 9-grid, which is our benchmark tool for learning systems. And then we're going on to Q&A. Now, when we get to Q&A, which will probably be only halfway in, this is basically your opportunity to ask the analysts. So anything you want to ask about the 9-grid, about the learning systems market, it's your opportunity to ask. I've got a colleague here that will go around with a mic if we need that. But basically, think about what your questions are. So, already said, Fosway, we have a lot of data. We get that data from both vendors. So a lot of the colleagues around the room, we know intimately. We've got a lot of data on them. And we also talk to corporates as well. So we are every year, and this is just the start of the season to go into next year's 9-grid. We also have some digital reality surveys that go on year on year, and we get responses from each year, different questions, slightly different questions, and I'm going to be using some of those questions today. You can go onto our website, fosway.com, and it will download the infographic, and any of the research there is free of charge. It's available to you. All you need to do is just register, and then you'll receive information of when we've got new papers and new 9-grids. One of the 9-grids that we've done has been published this week, and because we have 5. So there's 2 learning, 3 HR, and one of the HR ones is about talent and people success, and that literally has been launched this year, so that's something to go and have a look at. But we're not talking about that, we're talking about learning systems. And one of the questions that we've asked for the last few years is, what learning platform or solution in your ecosystem has been the most successful in supporting you in your organization over the last 12 months? Now, you can see from here, so most successful is this greeny yellow color, quite successful is the blue, then it goes quite unsuccessful, then least successful, and the black is not applicable. One of the things I just wanted to point out, the top of the leaderboard, if you like, is the learning management systems and the virtual classrooms were the most successful over the last 12 months. Now, if 12 months ago, the virtual classroom, because during COVID, that was the most successful system. And so we've seen now that, again, LMSs have kind of caught up. The learning systems piece has caught up. This next piece of information, we ask every year. So, do you think your current learning platform is fit for the modern workforce? And every year, it's a 50-50 split between yes, no, and what's increased slightly this year is the don't know. And that kind of, it's a shame. It's a real shame that people have, at the moment, learning systems that they're not sure whether they're actually going to be capable for the future. And my question, and it's not necessarily for something to be answered now, but as I say, year on year the needle hasn't changed, and I'm questioning: is it a vendor problem? Is it a buyer problem? And it might just be a combination of the two. I'm not going to dwell on that at the moment, but be aware it's not. You can be sold something that maybe doesn't actually suit your needs, and it's important to figure out what it is. Don't just kind of think about, oh, I've heard LXP is the thing I need to go looking for, and Google it. There's a little bit more involved than that. So another question that we ask is, when do you intend to change your learning platform in the future? So on this one, it's interesting that learning management systems here, if you look, within 12 months is this first section, and we're looking at nearly 20%, 1 in 5 people in the next 12 months are thinking of changing their learning system. So I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up or anything like that to say, but when are you thinking of changing or buying your first learning system? Also, there's a lot going on in terms of analytics and skills at the moment, but LXPs, LMSs, kind of neck and neck, but do we really understand what each of those delivers? And last one before we get onto the 9-grid itself, so your changing demands for digital learning platforms, what are they looking at? And what's interesting here is, again, skills management, okay, social analytics. Yes, they're going to use more of those platforms. Virtual classrooms, there's maybe a little bit of a negative. They're going to use less, but there's still quite a lot there. Learning record stores. Anybody know what a learning record store is? So that's another platform, and apparently there's quite a lot of folks thinking of using that. So it's just interesting to kind of look at the data. So let's get on to the 9-grid. So this is the Learning Systems 9-grid, and if that's the first time you've seen it, you'll be going, whoa. There are 53 vendors on that grid, and there are at least that number on my radar for next year. I'm not going to have room to put them all on there. So I'm going to come back to how to read the grid just in a minute. But alongside the 9-grid, what you also have are the key market trends. So if you go onto the website, download the report, you will find the key market trends and also the key solution trends. Now, these are the headlines, and I'm not going to go through all these, but there's a paragraph under each area that will indicate to you what the trends are at the moment in the market from our perspective, what we're seeing, and also on this next one, what the solution trends are. So that's a report. It's available to you to download. What I've also, again, before going back to the 9-grid, just to explain what it all means, this is the model that we use with the vendors. We ask them to fill in data so that, as an example, under learning experience, we've got these number of sections, UX, search, personalization, and under each of those subheadings, there's anywhere between 15 and 40 more questions to focus on each of those areas. Every single vendor is asked the same set of questions. It might not be the areas that their customers actually need or want, but so that we can start to benchmark them against each other, so that we can. It's just one part, one dimension of the 9-grid. So let's go back to the grid, and I'm going to be asking for your questions in a while. So I'm just going to take 5 minutes to explain what all this means. So what we have are 5 or 6 dimensions on here. First of all, we've got the 2 different shapes, so suites and specialists. So what's the difference between those? So a suite is likely to be something that can give you the end-to-end requirements, particularly if you are new to this and what you need is compliance, then you're going to need a suite that can deliver the compliance. The specialists are those that probably you would add into an ecosystem where you've already got a suite, but the specialists do something much more focused in a particular area, and they go deeper in that particular area. So, as an example, so we've got 4 specialists on there that are adaptive learning. Now, adaptive learning is something about personalising learning, and so you've got the likes of Realise It, Area 9, Exonify, QStream, that are focused on doing adaptive learning. And you would bring them alongside a suite that you were perhaps using for the rest of your the learning that you're doing, but you'd want something else to do the adaptive. There's an area that I talk about as programmatic learning. This is where it's not about the micro-learning, bite size, it's actually the longer programs that might be leadership, it could be onboarding, it could be a 3, 6, 9 months or beyond set of programs that need an environment for people to be able to go to that is digitally a great experience for that cohort going through. And so there are a number of specialists. You've got D2L, you've got Ludic. Hive do a bit of programmatic learning. It's more peer-to-peer. So they are specialists. All right. There's also we've got a new specialist. So one of the ways that we choose vendors to go on the grid, particularly if it's the first time, they either meet the criteria or we see them as being disruptive in a particular field. So we've got one on the grid there, Thought Industries. They're not in Europe, and what I need to say is our focus is very much on Europe. There are other analysts in the world, so the likes of Brandon Hall, Bursin, Deloitte, Gartner, that actually look at the whole world, but from a US perspective. We focus on Europe. So if you're not, so for example, Thought Industries in the US, they're doing a lot there, but they haven't got a presence yet in Europe, but they are on their way. And what we did last year was basically say to the rest of the market, for extended enterprise, so it's customer education that they deliver. It's not the internal L&D, it's the external. And because they're a specialist, what we've defined here is that particular one, it's the specialist in the external. They don't do internal, they only do external. That said, if you want to do customer training as well as internal, there are others on the grid, the likes of Docebo, Absorb, even 360 Learning will do that customer training because they're recognizing that's an area that through COVID it was necessary to build up the customer training that was being done in the classroom previously but is now being done online. So that's the sort of the one or two of the difference between suites and specialists. Now let's have a look at some of the other dimensions. So how do you get low, mid, high? It's not an analog scale, it's those 3 areas. You're either below the first line or you're above the top line, or in that middle section, which is very busy, it's mid-market, and there's a lot of systems that are delivering into that area. So potential, think about this more to do with the amount of functionality that the system has, but it's not just functionality. In particular, to get above the top line, you need to that vendor needs to have a focus on the large, complex, sophisticated corporates that are global, and it's their sweet spot to deliver and support them across the world, basically. So there's only a few folks above the top line that are capable of doing that at this moment in time. That is certainly the sweet spot. So Cornerstone, this particular grid was put together and published at the end of February this time. But in the meantime, Cornerstone have bought Edcast, which is next to them at the top, and SumTotal that's further down. So it's getting even more limited in terms of what's kind of above the top line. But we'll see how things go in terms of the research that I'm doing at the moment, that we'll see how the grid looks next year. So that's this vertical dimension. What about performance that way? So the performance is about their brand awareness, or in Europe, how aware are you of that particular brand? It's also about how often somebody is being shortlisted and how often they are winning deals. But also, really importantly, it's about their customer advocacy. So that's how well they are getting across from low, mid, high. Now, I often talk to the guys on this side of the grid. They have got great products, and they're focused very much on their products. They're not doing a great deal of marketing, and so there's not a great deal of brand awareness. And so to get across the grid, then they need to be balancing both the amount of funding that goes into their roadmap and their product, as well as their marketing. We had, just as an example, so Absorb, for example, they're here. They were, I think it was about 4 years ago, in this box. Massive in the US, but they had no people on the ground, no feet on the ground here in Europe. And so when they said, why are we there? Because they just hadn't got a presence in Europe. But as they, at that particular point, they got one guy in London at that stage. They have grown since, they have developed, they are now known in Europe. And so they've made it both in terms of roadmap, they've been adding to the roadmap, and so they're up into the mid-section and they've moved across. So the other thing to be aware of is the colours. The colours, again, low, mid, high, everything comes in threes. So the greens are a low total cost of ownership. It's not just about the licenses, it's about how much it costs to implement, it's about how much it is to innovate. So a lot of these days, if they're software as a service, then it doesn't cost a great deal to innovate, but there are one or two that still need updating, and therefore that will cost you to update. So low total cost of ownership, the orange is the mid, and the blue is the high total cost of ownership. The other thing that I want to mention that's not really on a key, but it's about within a zone, within a box, and one of the things that I need to say is every zone, every box has value. Unfortunately, the way people think, if they know Gartner, there is a Gartner quadrant, and you want to be at the top right-hand side. So everybody's clamoring to get to the top right strategic leader box. That's not necessarily where your best learning system is, because you might not want to be paying that, the high total cost of ownership, but also there might be so much functionality that it actually makes it complex. So the more functionality there is, the more likely it is that the look and feel, the usability, is a little bit more challenging for a user. So within the zone, again, they're not just haphazardly placed in the zone. This is more about what we as analysts believe is their trajectory through the next 12 months. So for example, and again, it's on the low, mid, high, so if you notice, there are 9 kind of positions within each of the zones. And if somebody is in the top right corner of a zone, then we see them as accelerating both in terms of roadmap, but also in performance within that in the coming 12 months. That's what we believe as analysts see that their direction of travel, their trajectory will be. If they are central in the zone, then that means that we feel that they are moving in the same direction as the rest of the market, because every vendor has a roadmap, and every vendor is growing, or should be, because of what's happened with the pandemic. You know, has made people need to go online. So I'm going to pause there and ask me, you know, have you got any questions specifically that you want me to answer about the grid? Does that help? Have you got situations, are there particular even vendors that you want to talk about? You might want to talk to me afterwards privately about some of those, but in terms of, you know, what questions do you have in terms of the market? All right, we've got a question at the front here. My colleague is, we've got...
Yeah, hi. Just the ones on the top right quadrant, aren't they also characterized by the fact that they've got other...
Sorry, put it in front because I can't hear you.
So the ones at the top right,
yep,
they're also characterized by being not really LMSs, they're human capability management systems, and they're broader enterprise level applications. Is that what brings you into the potential top quadrant?
It's a good question. So the question is the fact that those that are in the top zone aren't just learning systems. They actually go into HR systems as well. There's usually a whole suite that's in there. And just as this is focused on what they deliver from a learning perspective, what we used to do probably a couple of years ago, so for example, Workday and Oracle, we wouldn't put on the grid because you can't buy Workday Learning or the Oracle Learning suite without having Oracle. What we were tending back, you know, a couple of years ago was make sure that anybody on the grid was actually, you could buy as an individual module, if you like. And certainly with the cornerstones, you know, you can actually buy them separately. But what we were finding is because Workday, for example, was being so disruptive to the learning, you know, they were introducing a module. A lot of corporates were coming to us and saying, so what's the comparison between what Workday are doing and what our other learning systems doing? Should we ditch or should we buy another system, but rather than Workday Learning? So, you know, we were making sure that we had the data so from these organisations, and we decided to actually put them on the grid. So that's one thing that we can do, is change the rules each year, change the goalposts. But you're right, but we do focus for this grid on the learning part of the suite, but we do have other grids, and some of them are on multiple grids. So there's a core HR grid, and again, you'll find Cornerstone on there. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. So another question here.
Hi there. Are you seeing any common partnerships with a generic and a specialist in the market? And do you ever do the analysis of where that puts them on the grid if they were together?
Really good question. And yes. So one of the things on this wonderful data capture form that we send out, one of the ways that they can answer a question to do with, any part of it, they can answer it to say that we don't have that, you know, we have none of that functionality. We have partial functionality, we're full, we're market leaders in that area, or we do through a partner. And then we ask them to name the partner that they do with. So example, I mean, you might not have come across Training Orchestra. They're in that strategic leader box. They are not a learning system per se. What they do is help administrators organize the instructor-led part of your learning programs, if you like, and both instructor-led and virtual instructor-led as well. So they work with a lot of the other systems where they don't want to go into that kind of depth. Now, there is an issue here. So it's the larger organizations that can afford to have an ecosystem that will have both a specialist, a suite and a number of specialists. But that mid-market, we're seeing how a lot of these suites are adding a certain amount of the functionality so that it will actually satisfy the mid-market. But yeah, so another one to be aware of, Anders Pink do curation, and a lot of the other systems actually use Anders Pink. Either white labels, you might never know that it's Anders Pink, or in other cases it is that it's quite upfront in that sense. So does that answer your question? So
is this on Fosway anywhere? These kind of relationships, like, where can you find other relationships like this?
Actually, probably not. But I mean, I'm sure. I mean, if you want to ask a question about a particular vendor, who they tend to partner with. I mean, there's other partnerships that go on. For example, those that are on our digital learning grid, the likes of Go One that are here, or Open Sesame, the content folks, they have quite. They have partnerships with a lot on here. But there's an interesting point to be aware of, and you need to dig deep when you're questioning, because people will say, well, we have a partnership, but how deep is that partnership? And the integration, we've kind of coined the phrase ecosystemness, whereas it's how good are you at being an ecosystem and passing the data around between all the various parts of your ecosystem. And it's so crucial, more and more, that data gets around the system in real time, and that's also an issue. And so, yeah, but it isn't obvious from anything that we do. You would probably, you can actually, on some of their websites, you might see partnerships and things like that, or just ask them. I mean, yeah. Any other questions? Look, we've got maybe 2 minutes, and then you're going to be first in the queue for the drinks. 2 minutes. One more question, if there is any at all. Burning question? No? All right. If you have any question that you would prefer to ask me privately, then come and ask. Otherwise, go get your drinks. And thank you very much for an attentive audience.